Ben, the reason why you're here and why I wanted to talk to you today has more to do with the fact that we are in a period of defeat. I think that's pretty recognizable. I think there's a general sense of defeat right now for most people, broadly, but especially on the left. A lot of that, it starts with Bernie Sanders' electoral defeat, but includes COVID. It includes, Biden's pretty lame presidency and inability to get anything done. Even, when there was glimmers of hope, they've all been shot down for the most part. Obviously, what the Supreme Court has done in the last month, and there's probably another dozen things that we've hopefully repressed to some extent between now and then. And but it's a bad time, and I think that's pretty obvious. And so I think it's worth thinking through what the left does in periods of defeat, and to use, everyone loves to throw in, as Gramsci said, the political interregnum that we're in of, or as, Bhaskar has said before, kind of the left in purgatory of this moment where we're relevant in some sense, sometimes not always the best sense. But there is something of an activist and organized left in America. And at the same time, it's not really a powerful political force that actually can contest, global, or not global, but national politics, and try to win its objectives, try to win its platform, that it's, anything seems like, if we can get anything past here or there, it's a victory. And very often it is, but we still are in a fairly marginal position. And it does feel like the wind has kind of been taken out of our sails. So maybe just kind of broadly, what have you been doing in purgatory?
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess it's a little bit like was there some Zen story about this bodhisattva who, they asked what did he do before he achieved enlightenment? He said, I brought water from the well. And they said, what do you do after you achieved enlightenment? I brought water from the well. That's which is supposed to be really profound, I guess. So the kind of same spirit. I mean, it's like, I don't know, what do I do, right? I mean, I write articles for Jacobin. I have, I do my show, I do debates, all of that stuff. But yeah, it certainly does feel different. I mean, I could very fondly remember, being in like the, I don't know, airport on my way back from the last TMBS live show, working on an article for Jacobin about how Bernie Sanders really won Iowa, not Mayor Pete, and like that felt that felt good in a way that a lot of this other stuff does not, right? That's and I mean, I think the sort of I mean, there is a sense. I mean, you joke about the labor theory of value. I mean, I actually have been teaching a class on Capital Volume 1, so in a sense, that is a little bit of what I've been doing with my time. But I do. But yeah, I mean, there is this bigger problem that we're all facing in one way or another, which is that we certainly haven't had the kind of breakthroughs that we were maybe hoping that we might have had by now. And yeah, there is this palpable sense of defeat, right? That's the, whatever the meme is, my heroes are dead and my enemies are in power and all that stuff, right? That, like, I don't know about that, but like, some of them are, some of the heroes are still trucking, but like, but certainly my enemies are in power. Like the Roe v. Wade overturning is very grim. The outcome of the 2020 primaries, which we're obviously living with right now, and it feels like kind of about to pay the piper on in terms of electoral consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Biden was able to squeeze through. I mean, he actually didn't really win by all that much, considering, right, that like there was a plague going on and half the country was on fire, but like even under those circumstances, and it was also easier to vote than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly easier than it'll be this fall or in 2024.
Right.
And he still barely won. And now he, because it's fucking Biden, so he has there's I think like 26% or something of Democrats want him to run again, and so yeah, a lot of incredibly grim things are happening, and I think that it's not just that, right? It's not just defeat, although that's certainly part of it, right? It's also that. It's also the sort of lack of focus that when the Bernie campaigns were going on, that was something that anybody on the left with any sort of instinct for interfacing with real world politics was going to gravitate, was going to have that kind of gravitational pull, and there's really nothing since then that quite does that in the same way, right? That there's not like, oh, here's the thing that like obviously you're going to sort of put your energies and your hopes into, and and you're going to kind of focus on, where in some ways back to the normal state of the left, which is just kind of a lot of people are doing a lot of different things.
Right. Well, so that's something where I think a lot of people feeling defeat on the left are feeling it for the first time, in the sense that we have what the new left, the new left. There's too many. You can't call something the new left and then there be another new left after that. But whatever, we'll learn maybe. But whatever this is, the kind of the Bernie left, the left that has kind of come together in this period of the last few years. Of course, people would tell you that the left prior to that, if you were on the left in the 90s, it was pretty grim, and when you stay on the left for a long time, it is largely kind of a history of defeats, that you go through cycles of defeats, of kind of moments of ascendance. Sometimes there's some breakthroughs, but very often, just because of the structural imbalance of our side versus our enemy side, more often than not, we're going to lose.
Right.
So there, on the one hand, it's thinking through, how do people, for the first time kind of experiencing defeat, stay on the left and kind of become more kind of constructive with their time? So there's that. And then also the fact that I think like we probably do need more of a sober analysis of why there even is a left right now. The fact that, and I want your take on this, but the extent to which, we can say there's a left because of the Bernie Sanders campaigns. And if that's true, then why the Bernie campaigns, and also what were the limitations of that moment? And we can kind of sidestep for the moment, the whole question of Bernie 2024. I think like there's a number of conversations on that. And whether or not you support that, I mean, Bernie doesn't care. I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do, hopefully. But if that happens, or if it doesn't happen, it should be worth considering, at least in this moment, to what extent, like what that actually did for the left. And if that's something where, shit, that's all we got, or is there something that we can do more constructively between now and then, regardless of another Bernie run? But maybe just that first, Ben, maybe your sense of
Sure.
like what makes this new left a new thing. And then we can maybe move into, like what we can actually do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the two Bernie campaigns, which, are really where this kind of came together. I mean, I remember, I remember reading Jacobin in the very early years of Jacobin, and having, and like there was much more sort of theoretical, kind of content there. I remember, than there is now. It was, very much a product of like, I mean, I guess like Occupy had already happened and stuff like that, but like, it was very much a, it was very much a magazine of like sort of leftists talking to each other in a period when there wasn't really, much of a left to speak of, that, and, even Occupy. I mean, to name check a figure who's been on my radar recently. Like, I don't think it's, if you think about the fact that somebody like Tim Pool came out of Occupy, right? I mean, that kind of tells you something, right? That that it was this sort of like, there was this sort of very like primitive glimmering of some kind of like proto class consciousness, but it was also, there's also a lot of weird like, Ron Paul stuff going on in there, and whatever, right?
It's happening.
Yeah, exactly. So then, so the Bernie campaigns, I think, are really important for it coming together and like having this this sort of widespread sense of dissatisfaction about economic inequality that had really been festering since the since 2008, but had finally taken, I think, a more useful form, that one that was sort of explicitly focused on left policy ideas, certainly, right? And that had and that did have, in however sort of messy and ideologically unclear ways, right? Did have some basic kind of like good left ideas, baked into it. But the limitation was always that it wasn't rooted in anything like an organized working class. That that this was all going on while we had like a private sector unionization rate of like 6.7%. And so, and a lot of and then coming out of that, right, the sort of main like I mean, I've never bought into the idea that like the main reason that the Bernie campaigns are important is sort of movement building, even though it is kind of where a movement came out of. I think like if there's a case for Bernie to run in 2024, it's because you think he might actually win. Not as some sort of like workaround to try to build up left forces, because I think that's, if anything, right. I mean, if you lose, it's incredibly demoralizing, right? So like I don't know that even makes sense in its own terms, but I think that the main sort of fruit of that, in an immediate way, right? Besides like the lower level electoral victories, that people who are at least loosely aligned with the kind of Bernie-ish movement being elected to Congress and lower level offices and all that, which is big too. But like beyond that, the main kind of fruit was DSA, right? That it went from being a glorified mailing list of a few hundred people to a real organization of whatever it was, 100,000, and that's huge in a certain way, that's like you'd have to go back to the like Popular Front era Communist Party to find a sort of comparable level of socialist organization, although one that was a lot different in terms of social base, in some ways, right? Like the plenty of Hollywood actors in the 1940s CPUSA, but also a lot more shop stewards, than the
yeah, we mostly have the Hollywood actors this time around. That's
yeah, exactly. We've still got Trumbo, but we don't have the CIA organizers, So, yeah, no, exactly. So, and that's a problem. And I'm not saying that to like shit on DSA. I mean, they get some money from me every month. If every time a DSA chapter asks me to talk to them, I do it. Have very happily. But like, I'm glad it exists, but like I think that if you're going to think about it structurally, there is a real limitation here, not just because of that class composition question, although that's part of it, right? That this is what we have right now is largely a movement of either sort of middle class or kind of downwardly mobile ex-middle class, people. Which, I mean, on the one hand, that's innately a problem because just of, sort of limited capacity to make social change, with that chunk of the population, but also, which I'm very much part of, right? I'm not, I don't want anybody to be unclear on that, right? But, I'm an adjunct philosophy professor with a podcast. I don't know how I could be more part of it, right? But
Ben Bourgeois Burgess over here. That's
yeah, exactly. So, but try to be objective about it, right? I think that it's a problem not just because of that, or I think not even most significantly maybe because of that. I mean, I was having a conversation with you the other night where where you were saying some of this, not to blame you for the more controversial parts. What I'm about to say, that's just me, but they have but like I think that it's maybe a bigger problem because of obstacles that are built into that, just sort of given the way the American culture war is right now, to sort of using that as like kindling for a movement, that's of and not just for the working class, right? I think that there's a sort of conception of how to think about social justice. There's all sorts of cultural mores that are just actually really significant obstacles. And I know when you say that, some people will hear that as like, oh, Ben thinks that like, workers are all like troglodyte racist Archie Bunker types, and and you have to be one too to appeal to them or something. And that's not at all what I'm saying, right? That's like I think that most people who are in the multiracial working class, most people who are even pretty sympathetic to like progressive social policy positions, if you just don't come out of higher education, you don't come out of a certain sort of background, like that there's a lot of sort of signaling, and there's a lot of ways of expressing that, and there's a lot of stuff that's mixed into that I think that just is a built-in obstacle. I don't think it means that the sort of socialist movement we have right now might not play a useful role in helping to bring about something larger, but I think if we're going to be real about this, it is a big problem.
Right. But also to the point about, the fact that like the working class actually, for the most part, wants good things and they want good outcomes for most of their people. They're actually like, most people are actually good and decent, and just stuck in pretty awful circumstances. Even if that wasn't true, even if the working class was all troglodyte racist, the left would still have to figure out what to do about that, if it was going to be a real left. And I think this is something that like the left very much has kind of approached these problems as, here's my understanding of the world. And, if people don't agree with it, then there's something wrong with them. And, here and there, they've been like, when they've been successful, it's been when they've kind of put a ton of energy and resources into finding ways to communicate better, how to bring people over to our side. And so in many ways, the left today still struggles with and still needs to get better at actually making itself accommodate to the needs and interests of working people. That we say we want this better world. We have a very good sense of what's wrong with the world now, and some good sense of how to get from here to somewhere else that's better. And it's incumbent on us to actually convince people to come along with us in that we actually need to form relationships and solidarity and make ourselves useful to working people. But I think it's worth saying, and people rightly would push back against some of what we said and say, but the DSA is organizing. There is actually, is this really defeat if there's actually still efforts going on right now, campaigns, there's active campaigns right now. If you're in an urban part of the country, you probably, there probably is a DSA or adjacent campaign in your city, which is great. And, so the left is active, right? And in some ways, I think back to, Dustin Guastella and Jared Abbott wrote a couple of pieces a few years ago, thinking through kind of the issues with working within the Democratic Party and trying to propose some new novel solutions to that. And part of that was, proposing the idea of kind of like a heartland, where you win a number of elections in. Not necessarily, you don't want it to just all be like one city council, but you want, building up a lot of left electoral power across a region so that you can start to coordinate across a region and basically hopefully supplant one of the two major parties. And part of that has to do with kind of winning over the labor movement and kind of taking them away from the Democrats and pushing them into this would be something of a proto-party or something. Yeah. In that sense, like, I think you could make, it's maybe still too early, and hopefully it's too early. It might either be too early or too late, but that has somewhat started in actually places like New York and Pennsylvania and this kind of
Mm-hmm.
part of the country. And so hopefully, that, or at least, maybe that will be the result of this moment. We actually do get some like left in ascendance through very hard, diligent work. But it nevertheless, I think, is true. I was speaking with a friend of mine, David Alexis, who maybe the audience, if you're in New York, hopefully you know who he is. And kind of thinking through this question, because it seems like the left, or like what kind of makes up people coming into the left, and like the spirit of it when there's new campaign energy usually is, this time it'll be different. And not in like, I mean, sometimes it often is kind of the cynical, well, obviously it won't be if this time will be just like every other time. But I think you need that. I think like that actually remains kind of the left's like engine in some ways. And it is like a kind of it's, dysfunctional as it is, but like you need that insofar as, people do have experience in different campaigns, in different elections, in different union drives. And the left does need to touch on that history and say like, actually there is reason to hope again. And this is why we can win this time, and convincing people not just that, a better world is possible, but that a better world is achievable through actual campaigns, through actual political action.
I will say along the lines of that last point that, I mean, in some ways it's still a relatively small thing in terms of the number of workers involved, but I actually do get pretty excited about all of the Starbucks unionizations, because I think it's incredibly useful that you just have this like parade of tangible victories that, and it's so visible, right? I mean, this is they're everywhere, like you can, and it's very easy for people to to sort of involve themselves in some way, and in support of it, and and like even the sort of small symbolic gesture of like going to the Starbucks where there's an organizing campaign and telling them your name is Union Strong or whatever, that like have but like just having just this very visible series of points on the board, right? I mean, like there's I think is incredibly useful, and again, I mean, it points towards what we need, because you can't, even if the Bernie campaign, like even if Bernie Sanders had overcome the numerous obstacles and and actually won the 2020 election, right? He became president. That like as amazing and positive as that would have been, in a lot of ways, right? I mean I certainly don't, I certainly think that there are lots of those ways, right? But I do still think that, does that mean like we would have gotten like Medicare for all, not unless a lot of other stuff happened too, right? Since this is capital. I mean, obviously is incredibly political, powerful in any capitalist society, or else it wouldn't be one. But they have but particularly in the United States, right? That there's and the organized working class is so weak, right? There's so little of it, right? And so I think having something that is a tangible victory of exactly the kind of tangible victory that we need, and that's also national, right? I mean, that's huge, right? Just the fact that it's a national campaign, like that's exciting. That's exciting in and of itself, right? Because most people, especially because most people, being real about this, like most people who are sort of around the left, such as it exists right now, right? Which is like, a lot of what we mean by that is like left media, they, or a lot of people who might even do something like show up to a DSA meeting, like are people whose primary means of interface with politics. I mean, look, Americans in general in 2022, their primary means of interface with politics is not like reading a local newspaper, right? It's so, and particularly people who are likely to consume left media, who might even go to a DSA meeting or something, are people whose primary means of interface with politics is like, social media is a lot of it, and so they're, the thing about that, good or bad, right? It just is what it is that if something's only going on in one place, they're probably not going to hear about it, even if they are in that place, right?
Right.
So, like at least that that Starbucks organizing campaign is like the Bernie campaign in the sense that it's a national thing that's very easy to get clued into.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Maybe just to wrap this up and keep it maybe the most concrete that we've kept it this whole conversation. Just like in a moment of feeling like defeat, what should we be doing? Or maybe a different way to pose that is, should we be learning value theory right now? Is that actually?
Well, what you should do is you should read my article in Jacobin where you learn that in a certain sense, as interesting as value theory is, you don't need to assume anything about it one way or the other to make sense of the traditional Marxist charge of exploitation. And then you can read some Jacobin, and you can have a much better grasp on all of this. And look, I think that's a good thing to do at any time. I think you could definitely OD on it, but it is
too much college. It's overdosing on college. I think that's the Felix Biederman line.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think that's. I don't, I mean, you could definitely become somebody who that's what you do, and at which point you're probably, not as useful to a larger movement as you could be otherwise. And I do think there's some value, even when you're thinking about stuff like that, to like try to think about how that interfaces with something you could actually like explain to an ordinary person. Like if you, like that, like actually having that kind of in the back of your head, like how would you, like if you were talking to somebody who wasn't immersed in all this stuff, right? You say like, and you wanted to not even explain what you mean when you say capitalism exploits workers, because that would imply that you said that and then you had to explain it, right? But like get across the underlying thought, right? How would you do it? I think is useful. But yeah, look, I think theoretical clarity is good. I'm for that, right? But I think that I think it is important to stay engaged in the kind of like real world politics, and so like stuff like supporting union organizing I think is really important. And also I think that like I also just think like, look, whatever time you're going to spend thinking about politics, and I really hope on a human level that that's not all of it, right? But like whatever time you spend thinking about politics, I mean, I think it's useful, even in a, maybe especially, right, in a period of defeat, to to think about how to to like sort of stay focused on the kinds of political issues that would actually come up when you're talking to people outside of the left, that could actually, it's like, what are the big things that you think that like just ordinary people, your I don't know, your liberal aunt, whatever, right? Like what are the big things that you think that they're getting wrong, that are like not just like, oh, they haven't signed on to every facet of your worldview, but like, what are the big things you think they're going in fundamentally wrong directions politically because they're getting wrong, and how can you go about sort of explaining to them in a relatable way why it's right? And if you're going to have a breakthrough in the future, I mean, I think you're going to make yourself more useful to that if you do that than if you spend all of your time sort of retreating purely into study group kinds of activities, like do the study group, but like like maybe that could just be one part of what you do.
Right. Yeah. And if the study group, if going into the Marxology, going into learning all the classics, if it's just because it's like it's for its own sake and it's like subcultural and like makes you feel good, probably don't do it. Actually, like like get a better hobby. There's like
no, absolutely, yeah, like. Don't let your identity get too tangled up in that. I think is excellent. I think is excellent advice.
Read it if you're actually read it with the intention of this is meant to be useful. How do I actually make the world a better place? And because we don't just study the world for its own sake. We do it because we actually want to change the world, and malpractice is actually pretty bad. So it's worth it to try to get these things right. And so if you have the time and means, and like Ben's saying, there's actually quite a bit going on with union drives right now. So if you want something to do, there's some pretty immediate kind of first conclusions about how to make the world a better place if you're a socialist. So anyways, thanks, Ben. I appreciate your thoughts. I hope others do as well. And again, you should all check out his piece on G.A. Cohen and exploitation. And by the time this comes out, there's probably 10 other Ben Burgis Jacobin pieces, so you should read all of those as well.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.